Hello, this is an intro to web design. We're going to look at some HTML as well as some CSS or cascading style sheets. So this is Replit, and if you open it up, you'll see some files. If you choose HTML, CSS, and JS, which is JavaScript. I've already gone in and deleted the script.js file because we're not going to be using JavaScript today. I've also added a new folder for images that I'll use today. So this little button up here is to add a folder. I called it images with a lowercase i. It is important to note that it is case sensitive. So if you call it images with a capital I, just make sure you know that for later. And then I've just saved 3 JPEGs in here that I'll use later. We also have index.html, as you can see right here. And then we have styles.css, which is empty, which we'll add to later. In my HTML, I have a couple things here. I have exclamation point doc type, which just tells us that this is an HTML file. And then HTML consists of tags, which are in angle brackets. So you can see this less than greater than. So HTML here shows you that all of this stuff in between these two tags, HTML and then /HTML, is part of the HTML file. And then within that, there are 2 parts, the head, the tabbing and everything. This is for you. You can always do auto tabs to index your code or to format your code to see where things should tab. But again, the white space is for you to read. The computer doesn't really care if you put this on 1 line or 1,000 lines. But in the head, we have some metadata. You can see our character set, some other stuff in your metadata. You could also add things here like social graph stuff. So if you wanted to post onto Facebook, you could say that I want this to be the title and this to be the caption and this to be the image from my website when it is shared on a link via social media. Probably the 2 most important things for us is the title tags. So anything in a title tag in the head will be the title of your page, which will show up in your tab or if you minimize your window. Also Google or search engines, when they actually put a title onto your link, this will usually be your page title. So here you could put something. I'll put Candy Crush Academy as my title. And you can always use this button right here to export this into a new tab to see what it says, and then you'll be able to see your title up top. But your head, you wouldn't be able to see this information unless you went in and looked at that information via the inspect tool. The next thing we have here is a link. And in this link, we are going to link a style sheet. So this is going to be our cascading style sheet. And here we want to use href, which is a property of our HTML tag. Link is considered an element, and then href, rel, type, these are all considered to be attributes of that HTML element in the tag. So href is just a hyperlink reference, and we're hyperlinking it to something that already exists in our file. So styles.css. If this was in a subfolder, you would put the folder name /styles. Or if you were linking this to something on the web, you would probably have your https:// and then the link to that site. But in this case, it's already in here when you open up this template. So you shouldn't have to add that. But if you ever need to, it's link, and then you're linking a reference to that hyperlink, which is styles.css. And then your body, this is where everything shows up. So everything inside of this window would be your body. So you can put all your content here. So I'm going to paste some information that I already have. And I've actually already added some tags to it. So this is actually from the Wikipedia page for Candy Crush Academy. So I have here Candy Crush Academy. And again, this is all in the body. So this is going to be an H1. And I have a closing tag here. So most tags in HTML5 have a closing tag. But we'll see later images and some other things. Closing tags aren't necessary. So if I run this, you'll see what this looks like. Since I've already added my H1 tags, this is going to be a heading 1. This is the default HTML for a heading 1. So it's bold and it's a little bigger. Next, I have a subtitle here. This is the district, San Diego Union High School District. This is enclosed in H2 tags. So it is a little bit smaller, but it's still bold. And then I have 3 paragraphs, each with their own title. And each title is H3, H3, and H3. So even though we have multiple ones, they're all going to be the same size because they're all H3s. So history, curriculum, and athletics will be the same size. Since we're using CSS, you want to make sure that you put paragraph tags around your paragraph. If you don't, it'll still look the same, but as we try to modify it in the cascading style sheet, nothing will happen. So I have a P tag in the angle brackets, and then at the end of each paragraph, I have a closing P tag. If you forgot a tag, it'll be really obvious if you forgot your H1 because everything's going to look like an H1. So that is how we wrap tags in here. There are attributes we can add to all these tags. You can change things like the styles and the width and some different things using HTML, but we're going to stay away from that. And we're going to use cascading style sheets to do that. But before we do that, what we want to do is we want to add my pictures in here. So I picked out a picture for each paragraph. So to add a picture here, I'm going to use what's called an image tag. So the name of the element is img. And this has an attribute called src, which is the source of the image. And this is where naming that image was important. So it's in a subfolder called images. So I'm going to say images slash, and then my first one is called cca.jpg. And I'll go ahead and close that tag. So this is an example of we don't need a closing tag for images in HTML5. Other versions of HTML, you might have needed it or used some special a slash at the end. But for this one, if you run this, you will see that it doesn't work because it's called src wrong. So src for source. And now if you run it, you will see that image show up. And again, for purposes later, I put this inside the paragraph. So it's right inside the paragraph. And it's because I'm going to put this information next to the image later. You can adjust the width here, but again, you don't want to do that because it will take precedence over any of the cascading style sheets that you do later. So I'm going to keep it like that. In the next paragraph, I'm going to do img src equals images slash cca2.jpg. And then make sure you close that quotation mark. Again, it was very obvious that it was all orange before you did that. So now that will be the second image. And again, we can adjust the size later using CSS. And the last one, src equals images slash logo. And this is a PNG, so that'll be .png at the end. So if I reload again, you will now see that I have my 3 images in there. Before we move on to CSS, let's also add some hyperlinks to this. Hyperlinks are what make the web a web. Without those connections, we wouldn't have a web of information. We wouldn't be able to jump around to other sites. So very important. We're going to add one link to each of these paragraphs. So I'm going to pick out some information here. So I'll pick out, how about the word CCA here? I'll make this a hyperlink to the CCA website. So since we're making this phrase a link, we need to wrap this in tags. And the tag that we're going to use for a hyperlink is that anchor tag, or A. You'll see what happens if I just put an A around here. I try to automatically close it, so you might have to adjust that. You'll see as soon as I hit the slash, it knows what I most previously opened, so it'll put a /A. So right now, it actually doesn't do anything because it's not a link. To make this a link, this anchor a link, you have to add an attribute called href, which we saw up in that link. And this will basically be what the reference of the hyperlink is. So now I can do something like https:// and then cc.stuhsd.net. And now I can run this, and you will now see that by default, this will be a blue link with an underline. And as soon as you visit this, this will turn purple. And if you click and hold, it'll be red. So those are all the defaults in HTML, which again, we'll change later in CSS. Another thing you might want to do, because by default, most web pages will just hover up your page with the link you're going to. So you might want to open this in a new window or a new tab. And another attribute you can use for this is target. And you can say target equals _ blank, which will say open in a new window. A lot of these, if you hover over them, they'll tell you some more information about what you can do. So you can see target, you can do self, blank, parent. Same with href, you can hover over those, and you can see what the hyperlink points to. So Replic's kind of nice in that sense. So now I can pick out a couple other ones inside of here to figure out where I'm going to go. So I can go down here, copy and paste for these. And maybe I'm going to take Mira Costa Community College, and I'm going to paste a link in here. So href miracosta.edu target link, and then it closes right here as well. So now if I refresh, scroll down a little bit, you will see now Mira Costa is also blue and underlined. And for the last one, I'll pick out another link. This one I'll use Torrey Pines High School, which is right here. And I will wrap that in tp.stuhst.net, and again, target _ blank. And then you'll see that if I run this, now that will also be blue and underlined. So as you grab this and stretch it, you will see that all these words also move, so they're not locked in, which we'll fix in a little bit as well. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump over to our CSS, so our cascading style sheets. So that is going to be right here. If you don't see this tab open here, if you want to keep them both open at the same time, you can always drag styles over here. So if you don't see it again, you can take this, drag it over here, and then to have some more room, I can always minimize that because I don't really need anything else in there. You'll have a bigger view of your web page. So now that we're talking about cascading style sheets, there's a couple of ways we could do this. We can actually add styles directly onto our tags in HTML, so in our index.html. So on my body here, I can actually say, or my H1, let's do it with my H1, I can say attribute style, and I can say whatever CSS I want in here. So I could say something like background, which is a color, and then I can say colon, and I can say something like red. And now if I refresh this, you will see that the background of my H1 is red. This is called an inline style. And the way that cascading style sheets work is it starts with external, so in something like styles.css, then it goes to internal, which I'll show you in a second, and then finally it looks at the inline ones. So this will take precedence over any other styles you do. So if you try to change your H1 style background to another color, other places, it's not going to do anything because this is taking precedence. So we're going to avoid that for this project. You could also do this maybe up in your head. You could do styles or style tags. So we can make an HTML style tag in here. And now I can say, well, I want my H1. And the way that we'll see that cascading style sheets work is you can say the name of the tag or the element, which is H1. And then inside of braces, you can say background colon red. So, or actually, let's change to blue so you can see the difference. And now you can see that's blue. If I had left red in here, it would still look red because that would take precedence. So this is called internal, but we're going to also avoid this as well. So we're going to do all of our styles inside of our styles.css. So this is considered external. Another thing you need to know about cascading style sheets is it cascades, so it starts at the top and then it works its way down. So anything that you start with at the top will be overridden by anything below it. So if you change the H1 color at the top to green and then later change it to white, it's going to be white because that happened most recent. And then it goes top to bottom on internal, and then it goes inline. So because of that reason, we want to start with big, broad things. So probably the biggest, broadest thing we have is the body. So this kind of rule, these are called CSS rules. This one is talking about the element level. So if you had multiple bodies or if you had multiple H1s or H3s, it would change all of the H3s on the page. So right now it's just going to be body, which is it's considered a tag rule because body is an HTML element. So I can do things here like change the background. So you can see that now we're working in styles.css. It will give you this autocomplete. Background, you could separate it out to these things that have dashes like color, but background by itself, if you put a color in here, it'll just make it that color. So you could do something like, I don't know, gray or something like that. And you'll see as soon as you do it, type in a color, it will tell you what the hex code is. And it'll also let you click on this and pick another color. So if I wanted to, I could type in a hex code using the hash sign. So maybe I want to do 404040, which is gray. So here we have this dark gray color in my background. So if I refresh this, you'll see now that the background of the whole body will be gray. If you wanted to change the font color, the CSS property to do that would be color. So you can do color maybe white. So if you know the name of the color, you can just type it in. But white, as you can see here, if you click on it, is obviously 255, 255, 255 and hex. A couple other things we want to know is we probably want to change the font. One good rule about web design is that large font doesn't really matter. You can have these little feet and flourishes, which are called serifs. But for our smaller text, we want to use sans serif font. So something like Arial or Calibri. So these are okay, but the paragraphs we're going to want to obviously put some spacing in. But one thing we definitely want to do is make it a serif font. So we can do font family, and there's a lot of things you can do, and you can hover over to see what the options are. But if you know the name of the family, you can just type it in here in quotes. So I'll do Arial. And if I refresh it, you'll see that all of the font will change to Arial, including the H1, the H2, the H3 in the paragraph, which is fine because later on we can say change the H1 to something different. And because it's below it, it cascades, so that will happen after I change it to Arial. So it'll quickly change to Arial, but before you even notice, it'll change back to whatever you define it as later. Another thing we can do is look at the box model. So everything is considered to be in a box in CSS, and you can tell what the box is by putting a background color or a border on there. And you can see for the body, the box is basically the whole page. So one thing we can do is if we want to push things away from the inside of the page is we can add some padding to the inside of that box. So if we do padding : then you can add some padding to the inside of the page. So I can do like 30 px with no space, which is 30 pixels. And you'll now see that everything gets pushed away from the edges. So we'll update that in a little bit. Next, let's go to our H1. So we'll try to change this Canyon Crest Academy. Let's for now, we'll change it later. Let's just change this to red so it's a little easier to see for this example. Make sure you get rid of that pound sign. And I'll tweak this a little bit later so it's easier to read. You can always make this a little darker red if you want, so it's easier to read that font. So next, the next biggest thing we have are our H1, H2, H3 and paragraph. So if you wanted to change the H1, we could do this, right? So maybe you want to change that font family. So we could change this to something like Courier, which you'll see now if I refresh this, since this is a tag rule, only the H1 will change, and it in fact did. You can also add some background to this. So let's go background color. So background color, you can get away with just saying background, and maybe I make this black. And again, if you run this, you will see this box model in action now. So this is your box. So a couple of things we might want to add to this is some padding, so it's not so smushed up against the edges. So we could try something like 20 px, which again is 20 pixels. And for now, it is pushed away from those edges, which is kind of nice. You might want to center this. So to center text inside of the box, it's text line. A lot of these things you just have to play around with. Google's your friend, using things like W3 Schools and the Mozilla tools, the MDN references. These are very helpful. But there is a text line called center. So this will actually center the box, center the text within the box. We could make that box a little narrower too. That's going to be the width of the box. So we could say the width of the box is, say, 600 pixels across the page. And now you will see that it doesn't go all the way across the page because this is more than 600. The problem is this box is not centered on the page. So what we could do is we could mess with the margins. If we make the margins on the left and the right the same, then it will appear to be centered. So what you can do is you can say margin. And if you do margin by itself, it will do the margin the same everywhere. So if you said margin 10 pixels, it would be 10 pixels left, right, bottom, and top. If you put two numbers in, it will go the top and the bottom, and then the left and the right. If you put four numbers in, it'll go top, right, bottom, left, around there. So you could also break it out and say margin dash left, margin dash right, margin dash, and do everyone individually. But I want just the left and the right to be auto. And if I make them the same auto, then it'll appear to be centered. So I'm just going to keep the top and the bottom 0, or make it 0. And then I can type in auto for the left and the right. And now you will see that it is centered in here. Maybe I also want to change the font size here. So you can do font size. And font size, you can make it a little bigger. By default, it's going to be the default H1. You can make it 1 EM. And what an M is the default size of the font. So you can see that this is now the default size of their font. For an H1, that's probably too small. So if you wanted to double it, you can make it twice as big, so 2 EM. And then if you want it to be even bigger and really pop out in that title, you can make it triple the size, so 3 EM. And now it's really popping out. Now, in that box model, we also have the border. So border here, if you know the order, it's kind of easier. So the order is the size of it. So maybe I make it 6-pixel border. Then the type, there's a bunch of them. There's groove, solid. You can look these all up in the reference guides. And then after that comes the color. So maybe I also make this white. Now, if I do this, you will see now it has this nice border to it. There's other things you can break out from border. So if you do border, there's one called border radius, which is kind of nice because if you add a radius to it, so maybe like 30 pixels, it will add a radius to this border and it will give it that rounded look. So just a little nicer than the sharp edges. So you can continue doing this. You can do it with your H2, right? Maybe you don't want to do a lot to your H2. Maybe it looks good the way it is. So maybe you just do text align and you make that in the center. And again, the box doesn't really matter because there is no border or background, so you can't see where the box is anyway. Again, you can keep doing this, right? Your H3, you can add some more. So I've already written some stuff. So I made the width 100% of the page, or 100 pixels, sorry. I gave it a border, double line. I added some padding. I added some margin on the left. So if I run this, you will see now that the history is not pushed right up against the edge of the border. This little effect right here is because it's a double border and there's a radius of 15. And there's also some margin on the left, which kind of indents it a little bit. So you can see all my H3s are like that. My paragraphs, one big thing I need to do is I need to space it out. So I can do some line height. And line height is like double spacing. So you could try to guess what the number of pixels are, and you can use some other things, but EMs probably work the best here as well. So 2 EM would be double the line height. So that kind of spaces it out a little bit. 2.5, you know, we have this whole page, so we don't want it to be a strain on their eyes to read this, so it's okay to space that stuff out. And then finally, we could do something with the images. So all of my images are called IMG right now. Later on, we'll add some IDs and classes. But we'll do IMG, which is all the images. So if you remember when we added the images, the element was IMG. So one thing we could do here is we could change the width of the images so they're all the same size. And let's make them all 350 pixels. So if I run this, you will see that they will all be the same width. Right? Still doesn't look great by default. It starts the text right at the bottom right corner now. So if we want to change that, we can add something called a float, which will say float the picture to either the left or the right, and then everything else will fill in from the top there. So I'm going to fill all these in to the left. So the picture will be on the left, the content will fill in to the other side. So you can see it starts here and fills it all in. A couple problems we have here is it's pushed right up against the edge here. So the outside of the box model, again, that's the margin. And we don't really need the whole margin. We can just do the margin on the right side. And then we can add a little bit of margin. So we can do maybe like 10 pixels or so. And that should solve the problem of it getting pushed up against the picture. And as you can see, there is a margin there. We can also, round these pictures if we want. So same thing we did before. So maybe add a border radius. A border radius. And maybe we do some 30 pixels. Just again, not to have such a rough edge. So now these pictures are kind of like your H1, so looking a little better already. So it's looking pretty good, but there's a couple problems. This does stretch out, right? So we make it big or small, it might not fit. Right? So now my H1's too big. We'll fix that in a little bit when we get to responsiveness. But we also have all our images lined up to the left. So maybe we don't want them all lined up to the left. Maybe we want the second one to be aligned to the right. So there's no way to single this image out yet. So what we can do is we can go back to our HTML and we can go find that second image right here. And on my HTML tag, I can add what's called an ID, which is a unique name for this HTML tag, which is useful in not only CSS, but JavaScript eventually as well. So for this one, I might call this pic2. So notice now I have an ID called pic2 on this image. So this is now called an ID rule in CSS. So what I can do is I can use the pound sign or the hash symbol to denote that it's an ID. And then I can say pic2. And then I can open this, and whatever I do here will only apply now to this element. And again, there should only be one ID per page with that name, pic2. HTML, again, it's called pic2, no hash sign. But then when you're talking about H2s in your CSS, you can change that to hash or pound pic2. So now, if I want, I can say float, and since this is below images, it will happen after img. Now I can float this one to the right. And when I do that, you'll notice that my margin is still 0 over here and 10 over here. So you might want to change your margin, right back to 0. And then your margin left, it might look okay where it is right now, but eventually it'll get smushed up against there. So margin left to what I did one before, 10 pixels. So now when you run that, there should be a little bit of gap there, no matter where the page is. As you can see, as it gets closer to there, it still has that little gap in there, so the letters aren't smushed right up against it. So that's an ID tag. You can also do something called a class tag. And a class tag is nice because you can apply it to anything. You can apply it to a picture or an H1 or a paragraph, or as we'll see, part of a paragraph. So let's make a class rule first. And the difference between a class and ID is that it's going to be a dot instead of a hash. So let's do one where we just highlight the text. So let's call it highlight. Makes sense. And let's do this. Let's change the background to yellow. So the color yellow. We'll make it bold. We can make it nice rounded as well. And then we can add a little bit of padding and border radius. So if I run this, nothing happens because I haven't applied it here. But now what I can do is I can go in and I can go find something in my index. Right? You could just apply this to everything. Right? So if you wanted to apply it to the H3, you could say class now instead of ID equals highlight. Again, ignore that dot when you put in HTML. That's only for CSS. But you'll see that's what it does. I don't want it on my H3. I want to pick out some things in my paragraph. The problem is that it's kind of hard to pick out my paragraph, so I need to add this to a tag, and I don't have any tags yet. So if you want to do a tag within a tag, we're going to use something called a span tag. So let's find a good sentence here. I'm going to use span right here, and then I'll say the overall cost of the campus was $103 million, and then I will close that span tag. And if you run this, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to see anything happen. But now, since it's a tag, I can add class equals highlight. And now if I refresh it, you will see that that is bold and yellow, has a little bit of padding, and is curved, which is kind of nice. So you could add this as many places as you want. So you can add it in this paragraph and this paragraph. You could apply it to your H1 anywhere you want, and it'll look like that. So that is an example of a class tag, so dot highlight. Next, we're going to look at some pseudo selectors. So we're going to use these for links. So if you wanted to, you could add a link, so the anchor here, which is a tag rule. And I could say, make it bold, so font weight. And I could say bold. And let's change the color of it. So color, let's make it just red so I can use the color picker here. And maybe I'll make this just something that stands out so I can see it. Let's go with this like bright pink color. So if you run this now, you'll notice that it is bold, it's still underlined, and they're all the same color. So regardless if you click and hold or have visited them, they're all going to be pink. So instead of using just A, we're going to use what's called a pseudo selector, and there's 4 of them we're going to look at. One is link, and this is the default link. So if you click on this, now you will see that it looks like this. If I were to click on this and then come back and run it again, you'll now see that it's still that color, right? Because we did A:link. If you want it to change when it's visited, we can do A:visited. And then we can change the color again. So color, colon, and maybe we do a similar color, but darker. Let's go over here and just make it a little darker color. And now if we ran it, if we had visited one of these things, it would be a different color, right? This website doesn't know that I've visited already. If I open a new tab, you would see. Another thing you can do is you could take away this underline, and an underline is going to be text decoration. And if you don't want it, you can always just change it to none. So now when I run it, you will see that there is no underline over here. But maybe you want to make it obvious a link, so you do get the hand. Usually it's your default when you hover over it. But maybe we want, when we hover it, the hand to show up. So we can do a:hover, and now we can say something like text decoration, and then we can say underline. So now it won't be underlined until I hover over it. So now as I hover over these links, the underline will show up, which is kind of nice. The last one, if you want to use it, is called active. And this is when you're actually clicking on the link or currently clicking it. So you can say color, colon, let's change it to black just so it's easy to see. So now if I run this, this is only going to show up when you click and hold. So as I'm holding down on this, you can see that it is changing to black. I can click on it because I don't want to open the link. The nice thing about pseudo selectors too is you can actually add this to anything. You can add it to the paragraph. You can add a hover to the paragraph. It might get annoying. I could add it to a class like dot highlight, and I could say dot highlight colon maybe active. And then if I do that, then I can change the color or the background for the background to some darker yellow. Let's make it yellow, and then I'll just go grab that and just make it a little bit more orange, I guess. And so now if I run this, you won't be able to see anything unless you know to click on this and hold it down and highlight, spell it correctly. So now as I click down, you'll see it changes orange. So you might not know that's there, but it's a little Easter egg that you could put into your site. All right, so the next thing we want to do is start to fix this problem where it changes the size. So right now, as I stretch out, it is moving everything around. So I'm going to add something else kind of similar to a span tag, which goes on the inside of tags, but this one's going to surround tags, and it's going to be called a division or a div tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with my HTML. I'm going to add a div to around basically everything that I have. So starting right inside body, and I'm going to close it right before my body closes. So there you go, /div. So it surrounds everything. If I refresh this, nothing's going to happen because I haven't done anything in my div tag. I'm also going to add another div tag later, so I'm going to give this one an ID. I'm going to call it container. So when I run this, again, nothing happens, but now I can go over here and I can add a container. If you notice, the container was just a little bit inside the body, so it basically takes precedence. We want it to take precedence over everything else. So I'm going to add it here. Because it's an ID, I'm going to do hash container. And then I'm going to open my braces. And now I can actually change stuff about this. So one thing I'm going to do with my container is I'm going to change my body's background actually to that gray color again. It's a 404040. And I'm going to give the container a background color as well. And this background color I'm going to make red. I'll make it C70000. And now if I run this, you will notice that it looks similar, except now I have a gray background in the back. So my body, you can see, is right here. And now my container is this shape right here. So one thing that you might want to do is you might want to remove the padding from the body. Maybe just make that 0. By default, there is a margin in the padding. So if you take the margin and padding off, that's one little trick you can do to get rid of this gap up top. So now you don't have a gap anywhere, which might be nice. Because what I'm going to do is I want to just have gutters on the side. But now you can see the problem is my padding is going to go in on my container. So I can add some padding here, maybe like 30 pixels. That'll push everything away from the outsides. And I can also give this a width. If I give this a width of, say, 1100 pixels, and we can adjust this later. But now you will see that you will have a gutter over here. And as you stretch it out, nothing moves because now I have a set width. One problem is then if it gets too small, you have to scroll over. But we'll fix that with media queries later. You remembered earlier, the way that we centered a box is we made the margins left and right auto. So we could say margin, and then we can make it 0 space auto, which is top and bottom 0, left and right auto. And now we have this gutter in here, and it always stays centered no matter how big the screen gets. which is exactly what I want. You can add some more stuff, right? You can add some margin or some border on the left and the right. So let's just give it a little style here. So I'll just do border left, it's a 5-pixel solid border. And then I'll also do that to the other side. If I run this, now you have this nice looking thing right here. You can also add these div tags on the inside. So I might want to go ahead and add a div tag on my index, maybe floating right next to my first paragraph. So what I can do is I can add another div tag. And for this one, you can always pause this and check it out. But I'm going to put this right before my first paragraph right here. So I've already written it, so I'm going to paste this in, this stuff right here. So you can see that I added a sidebar ID to this. So there's going to be a div tag. And it's just some facts about the school. And here I used an unordered list and an H3 for the facts. So that should look similar to this. And then my unordered list just means that it's going to be bullet points instead of numbers. If you wanted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., you can use an ordered list, which is OM. And then each item in the list, you can just use LI for list item. So if I run this, you will see all that information right here. So I put it right on this side of the paragraph because I want it to line up at the top of the picture and not the top of history here. Obviously, this isn't great. This goes all the way across the page. So we can now go into my styles and we can update these styles. So here we can add our dot sidebar that we called it. And we can do some different things, right? We can change the background color. We can change the border. I'm going to go ahead and show you what I did. So this is a ID. So you would do hash sidebar, change the background to a solid color, add some padding and a border, change the width of it, right? So now it's 20%. And the reason why I can do 20% is because it's inside the container, which is 1100. So it'll be 20% of 1100. And then I'm going to float it to the right. So everything else should align up to the left. And there you can see that it adds that stuff into here. So you can continue to tweak this stuff, right? So if you wanted to space it out a little bit, you could. You could say for your ordered list, maybe you want that to be spaced differently. So I can go down here and add a rule for a tag rule for unordered list and change the line height and the font size, and then it'll space it out just a little bit more. You could tweak those things. Another thing you could do if you wanted to just change the H3 inside of the sidebar and not all the H3s, you can do a tag where you say hash sidebar space H3, which will say only change H3s that are directly inside of the sidebar. So if you want to change this color to red and maybe make it a little bigger, you can hit run, and now it will show up like this. So again, we had our tag rules, which are body, H1, H2, etc. We had some ID rules, container, sidebar, pick two, and then we had a class, which was highlight. So again, classes can apply to anything. IDs are specific to one tag. And then we had some pseudo selectors, link, visited, hover, and active. Because of the way that the cascading nature works, it should be in this order. Because if you have visited at the bottom and you change it, then even if you're hovering over it, it's still going to just take precedence with the visited. So it should be linked, visited, hover, and then active if you want it to work correctly. So the final thing we need to do is worry about these breaks. So right now this is good for a large desktop. But the problem is as soon as we get here, you're going to have to scroll left and right. So what we can do is we can use some media queries. And the way that we do that is we use the ampersand, the @ sign. So @shift2, and then media. And now we can, in parentheses, say something like max width. Usually what you want to do is start with a mobile first and then do min width and work your way up. But since we already started with a large screen, we're going to start big and then work our way down. So we can say max width, and a good line break here for the next desktop down and the next size down is 1200 pixels. So we can say max width : 1200. And then we can surround this in those braces. And now this, all of the stuff above it will still happen, but as soon as we get 1200 or smaller, then we can change stuff about this. So I'm going to change the background color of the container just so you can see what it looks like. You don't have to change the color, but I want to show you the change. And right now my container is 1100, and when I get a little bit smaller, I'm going to change that to 875 because that's still going to be just a little bit smaller than my next breakpoint that I'm going to do. So as I get a little bit smaller, you will see as soon as it gets close, you can see that background color change, but then you see the container also gets this close. So this is going to be like a smaller desktop. Eventually, we're going to get down to here where we're in like tablet and mobile phone area. So we can actually change some things there. So for this one, all I did was I want to make sure that it all fits in. So I get close, and as soon as I get close to hitting it, it goes to the next break and changes that width. So it all still fits. But all my content isn't moving around as I drag it. The next one we can do is going to be more like a mobile phone. So I'm going to just go ahead and paste this in. Again, you can pause it and look at this code if you want. But the next size down, we're going to do 992. I'm going to change the background of the body to red and the container to red, because now, since this is a fixed width screen, you can't really grab the side of a phone and drag it and move all your text. So we want to be able to use all that space. So instead of having the container be a set width, I have it a percent of the page. The reason I have it 90, you can make it 100, but then you have to go and worry about, did you add margin to body? Did you add it to these other places? And you have to figure out why it's taking up more than 100%. So if you make it a little bit smaller, then if you run it here, as you get close, you will see now, you can't really tell where the body and the container are because I took off the border and the colors are the same. The sidebar before, it was hovering next to it, but as I run out of real estate, I don't want to have it just have like 2 words in between the picture and this div tag right here. So I just said float none. So it's just stopped floating. I changed the width of it, made it a little bit wider. You can always align the text differently. You could center it. You can see my H1 in Canyon Crest Academy. I didn't want it to stack on top of itself, so I made it a little wider. I took off the background and the border, so there's no black lines around it. So as we get smaller, we don't want to waste screen real estate with all these extra flourishes and everything, so you don't necessarily need all those. And then you can see what else I did here. On my paragraph now, instead of aligning it to the left, I used text align and made it justified. So now you have it on both sides. You can go and change the link color, or you can change the background color to be a little darker. But again, I just made it a little bit different color, so it was obvious where that break was. And the last one is going to be for a mobile phone. So for this, you can change a couple of things, right? You still want to keep it to be a percent of the page. Again, if you want to pause it, you can see that this is going to be maxed with a 768, so anything basically smaller than 768. Here, I'm going to do the container and the body at the same time, because if you do a comma, it will say do anything with an ID container and the body. So I'm going to add some padding here, change the padding, add the background color. And then I'm going to say display none to the sidebar, because now that my real estate's too small, maybe I want to just completely get rid of that div tag so it doesn't take up space. You can see I changed the background colors again, just so you can see the difference. And then I changed the images. So I stopped floating the images and I made them 95% of the page with a little bit of padding. So now you can see that they stack on top of it. So even if I was on a pretty small phone with not great resolution, you can see the pictures still are easily seen. So if you wanted to, you could even take away some of this other stuff. But again, this is at media queries, so it's at media. There's a lot of them. Right? So if you go to the documentation by hovering over one of these things, it works. You can always go to the Mozilla page, the MDN reference, and check out all the different things you can do with those. So now, as I go down, you can see I don't have a scroll bar at the bottom, because as soon as I would have a scroll bar, it jumps down to the next one. And then if I do it again, it jumps down to this one, and then finally to the mobile phone. And again, it's okay to be able to stretch out, and I want it to stretch out on the smaller ones, because if I had it this wide and there was huge gutters that took a third of the screen, it's going to be really hard to read. But when I get to these larger desktops, I don't want people to be able to stretch it, across 2 monitors and be huge and have all my paragraphs on 1 or 2 lines of text. So I want to keep those alignments of my images and stuff the way it is. So that is an intro to web design in HTML and CSS.